If we hit 1,000 subscribers, I have a surprise gift waiting just for you. So, hit subscribe now. My parents left a box on my doorstep. No note. No hug. Just 5 words scrawled on a sticky tape. Don't make a scene. I remember standing there in my socks, the cold morning air biting my feet, staring at that plain brown box like it might explode. My parents never did anything without a reason. And they never, ever told me to stay calm, unless something was very, very wrong. I watched their car disappear down the street. They didn't even look back. I want you to imagine that feeling. The kind of dread that starts in your stomach and climbs up your throat before you even know why. I didn't know it yet, but that box was about to blow my entire marriage apart. And by the end of that day, 2 police officers would be standing in my living room, and my husband, the man I trusted with my whole life, would turn pale and whisper the words that changed everything. Please don't tell me. They actually did it. Stick with me because this story still gives me chills. And if you've ever trusted the wrong person, you're going to feel every second of this. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, married for 4 years to a man named Daniel. On paper, we looked perfect. He worked in finance, dressed sharp, always knew the right thing to say at dinner parties. My parents adored him, at first. But over the last year, something had shifted. My mother started asking strange questions. Is Daniel handling the money well? Does he still talk to that old coworker of his, the one from the Chicago office? I brushed it off as her being overprotective, the way parents sometimes are. What I didn't know was that my parents had started digging. Quietly. Carefully. They weren't the type to accuse without proof. My father had spent 30 years as an accountant, and once he smelled something wrong with numbers, he couldn't let it go. They never told me what they suspected. They didn't want to break my heart on a guess. So instead, they built a file. Documents. Bank statements. Messages. Everything they needed to prove, or disprove, the fear that had been eating at them for months. And on that Tuesday morning, they decided I needed to see it for myself. Not through a phone call. Not through an argument. Through evidence, sealed in a box, left on my doorstep with one instruction. Don't make a scene until you know the truth. My hands were shaking as I carried the box inside. Something about its weight felt heavier than cardboard should. I set it on the kitchen table and just stared at it for a long moment. Then I tore off the tape. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, my father's handwriting on every tab, bank records, screenshots of messages, a printed email chain, and on top a single handwritten note from my mother. We didn't want to believe it either. Please forgive us for not telling you sooner. I opened the first folder, and my knees nearly gave out. There were transfers. Large ones. Money moving out of our joint savings account, the one we'd been building for a house, into an account I had never heard of. Dozens of messages between Daniel and a woman named Vanessa, someone he'd introduced to me once as just a coworker. The messages weren't just personal. They were planning something. Vanessa wasn't just an affair. She was helping Daniel move money out of our accounts before I noticed. My husband wasn't just being unfaithful. He was quietly stealing our future out from under me, dollar by dollar, message by message, for almost a year. I sat down at that kitchen table, and I didn't cry right away. I just felt cold. Then my hands started to tremble, and before I even decided to do it, I had already dialed 911. The operator asked me to explain what was happening. I remember my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, calm and shaking at the same time, as I described the evidence spread across my table: unauthorized transfers, a hidden account, months of deception. Within 20 minutes, 2 officers were standing in my living room, gently asking me questions and looking over the documents my parents had gathered. One of them told me this looked like a clear case of financial fraud within a marriage and that I had every right to report it. That's when I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in, briefcase in hand, still in his work clothes, completely unaware of what was waiting for him. He froze the second he saw the officers standing in our living room. His face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. He looked at me, then at the folders on the table, then back at the officers. And in a voice barely above a whisper, He said the words that confirmed everything. Please don't tell me. They actually did it. Not what's going on. Not who called the police. He asked if my parents, had actually done something. As if he already knew they'd been watching him. As if some part of him had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. That single sentence told me more than any folder ever could. He wasn't shocked that there was evidence. He was shocked that he'd been caught. The room went silent. One of the officers asked Daniel to explain the transfers. He stammered, tried to spin a story about investments, about a business opportunity, about wanting to surprise me with returns before telling me. But the messages between him and Vanessa told a very different story. One with words like, before she notices, and just a little longer until we're clear. I stood there and watched the man I had built a life with unravel in real time. Every excuse he gave sounded weaker than the last. The officers weren't buying it, and honestly, neither was I. I asked him one question. Just one. Were you ever going to tell me? He didn't answer. He just looked down at the floor. That silence was louder than any confession. The officers explained that because this involved joint accounts and documented fraud, it would be treated as a financial crime, not just a private matter. Daniel would need to come in for formal questioning. As they walked him toward the door, he turned back to me, and for a second, I almost saw the man I fell in love with. But then I remembered the folders, the messages, the year of lies. I didn't say goodbye. I just watched the door close behind him. In the days that followed, I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like someone with a plan. My father, calm as always, sat with me and walked through every document with a lawyer he trusted. We weren't just going to let this disappear into a quiet divorce and a shrug. We were going to make sure Daniel faced full consequences for what he did, legally and financially. I filed for divorce, citing the fraud as part of the case. My lawyer explained that because Daniel had moved shared funds into a hidden account with clear intent to deceive me, I had strong legal ground not just for the divorce, but for recovering what he had taken. Vanessa, it turned out, had no idea Daniel was married. When she learned the truth, she cut off all contact with him and even provided messages that helped confirm the timeline of what he'd done. In an unexpected twist, she became one of the strongest pieces of evidence against him. Not out of revenge, but because she felt just as betrayed as I did. The investigation moved forward. Daniel was formally charged with financial fraud related to the unauthorized transfers. It wasn't going to destroy his entire life, but it was going to leave a mark that followed him. A criminal record, a public case, and the total collapse of the reputation he had worked so hard to build. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. The court date arrived faster than I expected. I sat in that courtroom with my parents beside me, the same parents who had once told me not to make a scene, now sitting there ready to make sure the truth was heard loud and clear. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue it was a misunderstanding between spouses, that this belonged in divorce court, not criminal court. But the paper trail was too clean. Every transfer had a timestamp. Every message had a motive. My father's careful documentation, gathered quietly over months, became the very thing that sealed the case. When the judge read through the evidence, there was a long pause in that room. I remember gripping my mother's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. The judge ruled that Daniel would face financial penalties, be required to repay every transferred dollar with interest, and carry a fraud conviction on his record. It wasn't a movie ending where he was dragged away in chains. It was something quieter, but just as powerful. His reputation, his career in finance, and the trust people once had in him. All gone in a single afternoon. As we walked out of that courthouse, I finally let myself cry. Not from sadness, from relief. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. I moved into a small apartment of my own, one that felt like mine in every sense of the word. My parents helped me start over, and honestly, our relationship became stronger than it had ever been. I finally understood why they handled it the way they did. They didn't want to hand me an accusation. They wanted to hand me the truth, undeniable and complete, so I could make my own choice about what to do with it. Daniel eventually moved out of state. I heard through mutual friends that finding work in finance had become nearly impossible for him after the case became public. Whatever path his life took after that, it was no longer tangled with mine. As for me, I slowly rebuilt. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with old friends I had drifted from during my marriage, and learned something I didn't expect to learn at 31, that losing someone who is never truly honest with you isn't really a loss at all. It's a release. Looking back now, I think about that box on my doorstep all the time. At first, I saw it as the moment my world fell apart. But really, it was the moment my parents handed me back my own life. Sometimes the people who love us the most aren't the ones who tell us what we want to hear. They're the ones brave enough to hand us the truth, even when it's wrapped in something we're afraid to open. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this: trust should never be built on silence. If someone truly loves you, they won't need a hidden folder, a secret account, or a whispered confession to prove it. The truth doesn't need to hide. Only lies do. So, if you're holding on to a feeling that something isn't right, don't ignore it. Don't be afraid to open the box, whatever that box looks like in your own life. Because on the other side of that fear is something far more valuable than comfort. It's clarity. And clarity, even when it hurts, is always worth more than a comfortable lie. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.